Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a pretty compelling exploration.
Yeah, we're looking into the educational journey of one student.
Right, someone who actually went through both the Japanese and American school systems.
Yeah.
First-hand experience.
Exactly. And we're looking at her personal reflections, but also, alongside research comparing the two.
So our mission really is to understand not just the educational differences, but also the personal side.
The adaptation, the growth. It's quite a story.
It really is. What makes this deep dive, I think, particularly valuable is that we're moving beyond just theory.
It's not just educational models on paper.
No, we get to see how these huge differences actually played out in one person's life. The challenges, the struggles.
And also the insights gained, which are pretty profound.
Definitely. And for you, the learner, this isn't just about, okay, Japan does this, America does that.
No, it's much more about resilience, isn't it?
It is. It's a window into that, into navigating completely new intellectual landscapes, the triumphs, the struggles.
And those moments where your understanding just clicks or shifts fundamentally.
Yes. We're going to unpack how this student didn't just sort of cope with these contrasting systems, but really how she grew and ultimately flourished.
Okay, so maybe let's start by setting the scene a bit, the broader context.
Good idea. Her research seemed to line up with other analyses, highlighting these key distinctions.
Right, things like the length of compulsory education, that's one difference.
So I think more fundamentally, it's the curriculum approach that seems really key.
Definitely. The Japanese system, it tends to be described as narrow and deep.
Meaning
really focused, intense on a set national curriculum, mastery within that scope.
Okay, versus the American system, which is often called broad and shallow.
Yeah, more decentralized standards, exposure to a wider range of subjects, maybe not always the same depth initially.
So that's a huge difference right off the bat. It shapes not just what you learn, but how you learn.
And these structural things, they reflect different philosophies, right? Seems like it. The Japanese system, from the research and her experience, seems to emphasize effort, patience.
Group harmony, too. And memorization plays a big role.
Whereas the American system typically puts more value on creativity, maybe flexibility.
And critical thinking, developing those skills.
Which the student really noticed. She mentioned being surprised initially at her American university.
How so?
Well, the lack of classes that were just about memorizing the answer.
Right.
And instead, this big emphasis on writing, on building a logical argument.
That must have been quite a shift.
Huge. And interestingly, while she agreed with the research on these basic differences, she didn't agree with the conclusion some papers drew that American education was somehow, inherently inferior.
That's powerful. Her lived experience offered a counter-narrative, essentially.
Exactly, a real counterpoint to just looking at stats or generalized descriptions.
Okay, so let's get into her time in the Japanese system then, especially that private high school experience. Yeah, because that adds another layer, doesn't it? Beyond the generalizations.
It really does. She observed this pretty clear socioeconomic hierarchy.
Among students and parents.
Both, yeah. The influence of parents with connections, with resources, it apparently played a real role.
Even in things like getting into university.
Especially with something called the school recommendation system.
Okay, tell me about that. It sounds like a key pathway.
It is, or can be. It's meant as a legitimate route to university based on your high school record and the school's endorsement. But she observed it often seemed to, favor the kids of influential parents.
People heavily involved in the PTA, maybe big donors.
Exactly, those types. She even described the whole process, for some, as almost like a battle between parents.
Wow. So that adds a whole social dynamic on top of the academic structure.
Absolutely. It's that hidden curriculum,
Yeah.
The unspoken rules, the power dynamics within the school itself.
Okay, so she navigates that system.
Yeah.
Then comes the big transition. America. University.
And this is where that theme of resilience really comes to the forefront, I think.
Because it wasn't easy.
Not at all. She was immediately struck, almost shocked, by her classmates' thinking skills.
Their logical reasoning, their ability to argue a point.
Yes. She said she felt genuinely lost in discussions, especially ones based on opinions or interpretations.
That feeling of being lost. But she didn't shut down. That's where you see that growth mindset, right? Seeing it as a challenge to overcome.
Definitely. And understanding this initial struggle is crucial for her whole adaptation journey.
She could see the good things about the Japanese system, couldn't she? The teamwork, cooperation.
Oh, for sure. She acknowledged those strengths. But she also reflected on the potential downsides. Like, maybe it could be a bit of a closed and limited environment sometimes.
Potentially stifling independent thought
Mm-hmm.
or individuality.
Perhaps. She even wondered if that kind of environment might contribute to problems like bullying or kids refusing to go to school, things she'd thought about.
So imagine that shift from a culture valuing group harmony, directed learning.
To one where you're expected to think independently, argue your point, stand out a bit more.
It's a massive cultural and intellectual leap.
Mm.
And clearly, she was confused at first. It took time to adjust.
And that perseverance, just sticking with it through that confusion, navigating those huge differences, that's grit, plain and simple.
Yeah, pushing through that feeling of being lost in discussions instead of just retreating. That takes real determination.
But it's often through those struggles, isn't it, that the biggest breakthroughs happen?
It seems so. There was this key turning point involving a conversation.
With a friend, right, a Japanese friend.
Yes, who was pretty skeptical about the whole idea of diversity.
Kind of arguing that, cultural uniformity is better for national unity.
Exactly. And that's a perspective you hear, that homogeneity equals strength. The student actually initially agreed with her friend.
Really? So she was questioning things like supporting small minority groups?
Yeah, wondering if it made sense from a national unity perspective.
Yeah.
Shared that initial viewpoint.
So what changed her mind? It was something unexpected, wasn't it?
Completely. It was ChatGPT, believe it or not.
An AI. How did that help?
She used it to try and understand the difference between, say, historical forced assimilation policies
Oh, okay.
and modern global unification movements. And the AI highlighted the key distinction: coercion.
Ah, was it forced or was it voluntary? That was the core difference it pointed out.
Precisely. Such a simple idea, but it was critical.
That's fascinating, using a tool like that to get clarity on a complex ethical point.
And it totally reframed things for her. It made her go back and reread a paper she'd encountered on assimilation policies.
With this new lens,
Yeah.
focusing on the forced aspect.
Exactly. And suddenly she got it. It wasn't just about, oh, should we preserve minority languages just because?
It was about the forcing aspect, the history of banning languages, social pressure, taking away cultural identity.
Yes. The ethical problem of forced assimilation, that became crystal clear.
That must have been a huge aha moment.
It sounds like it was
Yeah.
a really significant personal shift in her thinking,
So she moved from thinking cultural uniformity was necessary.
to really questioning the ethics of forcing it, and realizing that maybe unity and respect for diversity could actually coexist.
That ability to really dig into her own beliefs, question them based on new information, and shift her view. That's a great example of a divergent mindset, isn't it?
Absolutely. Moving beyond that single viewpoint.
Yeah.
Embracing the complexity, the nuance,
And understanding diversity in a much deeper way.
which then led to another realization about her professor's assignments.
The multimedia project, the critical review.
Yeah, she realized they weren't just about learning about diversity from a book,
What were they about then?
about engaging with it, discussing it, interacting with different perspectives, questioning your own beliefs.
Experiencing the ideas, not just memorizing theories.
Exactly. True understanding required that active engagement.
So wrapping this all up, her journey is so much more than just comparing Japan and the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. It's a powerful story about resilience, isn't it? Facing those huge adjustments.
Yeah, an incredible intellectual growth, really spurred on by her willingness to face those biases she started with.
And to learn from, well, all sorts of sources, friends. AI, rereading academic papers, adapting her core beliefs.
Which brings up a really interesting point for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Think about your own life. Have you ever been in a situation, maybe work, maybe travel, maybe just a conversation, that radically challenged how you saw things?
A situation that maybe made you uncomfortable initially.
Exactly. And what did it actually take for you to adapt, to learn, maybe even change your mind?
It's a great question, because this student's story really highlights how crucial that intellectual flexibility is.
And the willingness to question our own assumptions, plus that grit to push through the initial difficulty.
Absolutely. It seems true understanding, real learning, often involves that discomfort, doesn't it?
It really does. And critical self-reflection and just having the courage to embrace a new way of seeing things, even if it's challenging.